Scumbling is one of the most basic techniques, but it's got infinite uses. You can use it as a surface all its own. I did this with these two colors that I'm going to show you here in a second to get, I don't know, maybe kind of an antique leather sort of feel, but you can use it for the base coat, for all kinds of faux finishes, for anything that's got kind of an organic feel. Maybe you're doing some flagstone or it's the first step in some marble, all kinds of things. You can even just use a scumble to suggest walls that are painted a particular color, but feel a little bit more lived in. So maybe you're going to paint your walls of your set this color, but that looks pretty fresh painted. So you can take a value a step up from this and then a shade a step lower than this and scumble them together. And it'll be almost imperceptible from the audience, but it'll give a nice sort of lived in look that you won't get if you're just putting fresh paint on all of the walls. So I'm going to show you how to do this. If you're in a really sort of dry area, summertime here, I'm going to give myself a little bit of a gentle moistening of the surface here so that I don't get too dry too soon. You do want, this is kind of a slippery little technique. And then what you want to do is just come in with one of your two colors. You know, the base coat color here is not white, but it could be white. It could be anything you want. I'm just going to drop in a few little random shapes. And you want to be real careful. You don't want to make dice. You know, you don't want to make shapes that are a little too obvious. And then I'm going to bring in my other color here, in this case just sort of straight up black. I'm going to put those in sort of near areas. And you can do this with much bigger brushes than these. You can even really do it with a roller if you want. And the idea here is to sort of blend these colors together while keeping the original color. And just to keep this a little clear, I'm just going to grab a third brush here that's clean. You can just really use your other two brushes, but I'm just going to start working these in. And it's a kind of a scrambled egg pattern, I think. You're going to sort of move your color around so that you're getting both of the colors blending together. And you're going to keep on working that until you don't really see any real edge. So I'm going to just sort of push these colors around. It's real smoky, sort of interesting. Again, the bigger the patches that you do. I'm blending to some other colors here. You can see that as the colors start to hit together, they're starting to blend, especially if it's a little thinner paint, like this is slightly thinner paint. It's going to mix a little bit faster and the paint is not quite as thick. And then I've got some sort of interesting organic shapes going on here. Real high contrast with this because it's really some dark colors. That black is really darkening things down. I've almost got kind of a rust pattern going on here. This is sort of an interesting backdrop. I come back over here a little bit and start to spread this. You want to work in small batches with this. Work until, you know, work in an area that you know you can get done. As soon as you start drying, as soon as the paint starts drying, you start running into trouble because you're going to end up with any kind of the brush marks that are in the paint getting stuck in there, and you probably don't want that. You probably want to keep this really nice and sort of organic. This is great for clouds. You can use this again for the first step in all kinds of organic faux finishes, or just even just as a surface itself. It's just kind of an interesting kind of tone that can happen. Just going back in here and kind of picking these up. You can bring some water to the party, but one of the really important things to do is to make sure that you are not swamping your surface. You know, the paint is kind of staying where I'm putting it here, and that's good because if it were too much paint or if it were too runny, then you're just going to mix. You're not going to keep any of these areas. I want to keep some of this black. I want to keep some of the sienna that's in here. I don't want to lose those colors as I do this. And if I have too much paint on the surface, not only is it going to be running everywhere, but I'm also going to just be mixing inevitably to a middle tone. And that's not what I want either. So I want a little bit of this black and a little bit of the burnt sienna to be still showing through when I'm done with my scumble. So you can see this is going to dry to a surface. Now, if this were much bigger, we might call this a broad scumble because we see lots of patchwork pieces. If I keep on working a little bit more, this sort of dried out version, the finished version, I sort of kept on polishing that a little bit. As this gets a little bit tacky, you can bring in another clean brush and do this sort of a whisk broom action on it. It's probably a little too wet still to, well, you can get the idea there. But as I start to kind of polish that surface, that's turning it into more of a tight scumble to where it's a little bit more cloudy. This is great for like soot. You want to use this kind of technique on, you know, behind a chimney or a stove, fireplace, you know, bring in some very gentle textures, or any place where you want it to be a little softer. Just sort of coming in with that second brush, or I guess what is this, third or fourth brush at this point now, and getting these areas gently sort of polished up. See, that's really creating, it's not quite as bold as it was before. We still see the kind of random pattern happening here in the surface, but it isn't quite as patchworky as it was when it was a little bit broader. And again, you can keep on working this for a while until the paint gets too sticky to move, and it's just going to get these softer and softer blends. You can even at this point here, when it starts like this, add another color. So you want to add a little wispy little bit of white. Here, I think I've got some white off to the side here. Let's see what that does to it. Tap that in over here. And I'm just going to sort of blend in sort of this soft little cloud here. Gets added again, sort of furthering my rust feel with this extra color here. Wipe that off a little bit. I'll keep on sort of blending that gently into the surface, and you can keep this going, you know, for a while. You can stop at that first step, keep it really broad, keep it real simple, and really very broken, kind of like a photographer's backdrop. It's great for clouds, that sort of thing, or you can keep on gently blending these colors. You can also, of course, notice that because this background, the base coat was a color all of its own, I could really have even done a wet over dry. I could come in with one color and not completely covered up a base coat. Here I completely covered up a base coat, just ignored that kind of almond color underneath there and brought my colors completely opaquely on top. And that's what you would do if you were painting over a white, you know, over a base coat, over sizing or whatever. But there's nothing that stops you from making your base coat be one of the colors and then doing what we would call a wet over dry. And that's just blending a surface, leaving lots of patches, leaving the base coat poking through. Once this is entirely dry, if I look at it and say, wow, it got a little too light, I really feel like I want to bring in some more black, I can do the exact same thing. I can bring in some of these black colors on top here. It's still a little too wet for this, but now if I add some more black on this, pretend this paint is a little drier than it actually is, and I can do that same action again by blending over one color and leaving lots of bits of the other color exposed. Notice I'm changing the angle of the brush a lot. I'm using this sort of feather duster, whisk broom kind of action to sort of gently blend that in by leaving some little patches. Again, it blended pretty fast here because this paint was still pretty wet, but if that paint were dry, you'd get much more of that toning over the top of it. Even just using that one bit of a tone to add some patina or to tone down, maybe you've got one door on your set that's getting hit with the light a little too bright and it's really bouncing too much, well, you can gently do one of these little dry brushing scumbles over the surface of that door and bring the tone down. Lots of very useful things that you can do beyond just simply an effect all of its own, which is impressive enough, but having it be the first step in a lot of terrific paint treatments. The scumble is going to be infinitely useful, as is the wet blend and the broad and tight scumble and the wet over dry and all the variants to the scumble. They're all very similar with those slight changes. So give those a try.